everybody, and welcome to Making Finances Sexy. My name is Jessica Lay, your Rent Rave owned realtor and certified instructor with the company 101 Financial, right here in the Valley of the Sun, making it my mission to assist you in moving out of renting and into homeownership, no matter your situation. I'm ready to be your personal finance coach and first-time homebuyer specialist. And then my co-host here.
Hi guys, it's Rose, the Red Queen. I am a realtor here in the Phoenix Valley as well. I'm also a financial consultant and CEO of Chronica Luxury. My mission is to help people live their dream lives and fire their boss. Come down the rabbit hole with me.
Ooh. So what the Fed?
What the Fed?
What the Fed? What is the Fed? So we're excited to go over one of the first speakers we saw at Limitless weekend. His name was Joseph Wang, and he basically talked about like the impact of the interest rates on our dollar and then the problem with inflation, saying how it is like a global problem. It's not just the US, and I think I kind of agree with that. And also about the Fed raising interest rates and finding out that this isn't working, essentially. I don't fully understand the concepts of the Feds and central banking, but I'm excited to talk about it with you, Rose.
Yes, I'm excited as well. Yeah, it's interesting to see, everyone in real estate and whatnot, we talk about all the time, the Fed and interest rates with mortgages and things like that. And while it does directly affect mortgages, it affects so much more of the economy. And it's been really interesting to see kind of the conversations that have been happening around, is the dollar going to tank, especially with the oil industry, certain countries trying to push oil away from the US dollar. I think it'll be really, really interesting to see what happens. But for us, we pay attention specifically to the interest rates with mortgages and things like that. And yeah, it's kind of interesting to see that it's not really doing what the government thought it was going to when they raised interest rates. It helped for a little bit, but the rippling effects are not there that they thought it would be there. So it's pretty interesting.
Right. So let's get into what Joseph was talking about.
Yes.
He basically brought up like the tools aren't working that the Federal Reserve, whatever is in their toolbox. And he brought up population aging, so like the labor shortages. Joseph said we're running out of people. People have smaller families now. I kind of agree with that because both my parents had like 4 to 5 siblings each, and then I just have one brother. Kids don't have to, like, I know parents like back in the day had to have plenty kids so they could help work on their farms or lands or whatever. Back then we don't have to worry about that as much now, and then also it seems to be harder to afford to have multiple kids these days. But what do you think about the population aging that Joseph Wang brought up?
I love when people say that we have a population shortage because it's so not true. I mean, last year we hit the highest population that we've ever hit, right? It was like 8 billion, I think. Population aging, yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem here, and it's a problem specifically in China. You're seeing it a lot where they're the one child rule kind of really killed them as far as economically, because now you have all these people who want to retire and there's no one there to support them. And that's kind of what you're seeing here in the US too, is where, people can afford not to have children. Like oftentimes we think, you can afford to have a child, but it's kind of the reverse where people can afford not to have a child because again, they don't need them to work on farms. They don't need them to do anything, all the things that people used to have lots of kids for. And so do we have a population shortage? No. Do we have an uneven population? Yes. And what that means is a thriving economy and a thriving population is, basically an inverse pyramid where you've got your youngest and then it tapers down to your oldest. And what we have is the bulk of our population is elderly and then it dwindles down into us. And you hear this a lot with the labor shortage argument, but let's be honest, AI and robotics and things like that have been knocking out what was considered normal jobs for the middle class anyway. So we don't really have a labor shortage from that perspective. What we have is a smarter worker who doesn't want to put up with the BS that our parents and our grandparents put up with. But it's those workers that are needed to help support the elderly. And that's where they get into this whole, oh, there's a shortage conversation, in
Oh
my
yeah,
opinion.
no, that makes sense because like even at the grocery store, self-checkout
Yeah.
and things like that.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
totally. Joseph also brought up like the fiscal spending, and how, well, little background facts, I guess. So our US Treasury, right, it operates and maintains like systems that are critical to the nation's financial infrastructure. So the government's buying goods and services and pulling out of the treasuries for more money printing, but that can cause a serious issue, right? Because we shouldn't be printing more money, essentially.
Yeah, that's always kind of the go-to of like, oh, we'll just print more money. And anytime you do that, all you're doing is destroying the value of the dollar, right? When you have more
Mhm.
supply of something, it's less. Like it's just basic supply and demand. So yeah, supply and demand. You print more money, then the value of the money goes down. And so debt's always been a problem with our country, like our country being in debt or indebted to other countries. And it's something that a lot of people don't understand, like myself included. I really don't understand it. And with the more and more collapse of the bipartisan system within the United States and the lack of actually working together between all the parties, that's where the conversation of, well, are we going to raise the debt ceiling? Are we not going to raise the debt ceiling comes into effect? And a lot of people are talking about, what the government did is what's causing the banks to collapse and everything like that. And what really causes the banks to collapse is they're taking our money and they're investing it wherever the hell they want. And so it's more regulated now than it was, but it's still not really fully regulated. And then you got a bunch of people who are freaking out over the economy, trying to withdraw what cash they have, which doesn't really make logical sense. But as soon as you get an influx of people trying to get their hands on, the physical cash, then yeah, of course, there's going to be issues. And that's what's really leading to the bank's collapse, is not necessarily what the government's doing, but the public's knee-jerk reaction to it.
Right. Yeah, that's like how much higher can our, like, what is our debt ceiling? Like I have no idea. Like how much more in debt do we need to get into? Or
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's frustrating too, because it's like, originally income tax was supposed to be a 1-year thing because it was like, oh, well, we just need, to get past this little hump. And then it stayed. And then we're paying all these taxes, but nobody really knows where they're going to. And so, we're paying for public schools that don't teach people anything. We're paying for, a bunch of services that we don't fully understand. And then somehow we're still in debt. Like, there's a really, really big problem, I think, within our government of just really irresponsible spending. And I think that's what we're really seeing the repercussions of with this.
yep. And then inflation right now probably has something it's relatable to this, and that's why the government is raising interest rates to try and combat the inflation. Am I understanding that right?
Sort of. Interest rates kind of cause the inflation.
The interest rates
Um,
cause
it it's anytime you make something more expensive, there's less money in the system. If there's less money in the system doesn't work as well. So yes, they raised inflation to kind of help curb loans more than anything, because the whole point of raising the interest rate on mortgages was to make it harder to buy a home, right? And to try to curb the prices of home going up. But again, that is a basic supply and demand principle. If interest rates go down, how home prices go up. If interest rates go up, home prices stabilize. They don't necessarily go down, they just stabilize, because rates are variable. You can always, we always tell people marry the house, date the rate, because you can refinance whenever that rate drops. And so, did it work with slowing down the amount of loans that people could get to buy homes? Yes, it did. But it also, we're seeing inflation everywhere through supply and demand issues and everything like that because of COVID. So you have a whole generation of people who are still trying to buy homes who are going, okay, well, cool, I'm just going to save then. And so what you're doing is actually taking more money out of the national system and causing an even greater economic problem.
That's a good point. Yeah, like a lot of our clients, they're sitting here waiting for interest rates to drop or housing prices to crash, but obviously that's not very foreseeable in our future. So you brought up a good point. Like you can refi later if the interest rates do drastically to go down. I don't think that'll ever happen, but definitely at least you won't be stuck locked into a super high rate, or it's not even that high, honestly, 7.2% right now.
Yeah, which is still historically low.
Yes. Um, we say high because people have gotten very accustomed to the COVID times, interest rates 0 to what, 2%?
Yeah, exactly.
Like that.
Well, and this conversation too is why I laugh when people are like, oh, we have a population shortage because we don't have enough homes for the population that we have currently. So we're cranking out these homes because we've got, especially in like the bigger metropolitan areas like Phoenix, especially, we have way more demand than we have supply. But you couple that with the fact that people aren't reproducing as much, and there's a good chance that in 50 to 100 years we're going to have way more houses than we have people. Just following the trends, right? Which means that at that point housing prices will drop because the supply or the demand isn't as high, but the supply is. So again, basic economics.
No, that makes sense. I don't feel like the population is shorting at all, and people are living longer, medical advancements and things.
Why these countries that are so anti-immigration are doomed to fail, because at a certain point, like you're seeing a lot, sorry, you've seen it a lot, like I said, with China and whatnot, where they're not really immigration friendly, but they're going to need immigrants to keep their economy going the way it is. And, America likes to think that we're different. We're no different. And that's why you have countries that'll actually pay people to move there because their population have all emigrated out and now they need people to come in and keep things running.
Yeah, that's true. So that brings up another good point that Joseph Wang brought up during Limitless, and that's deglobalization. So he was talking about trying to keep all our resources and like excavate things and like oil or lithium or whatever resources that the US needs, and like getting it from us, like in the US directly, and not importing as much, because I don't know what the relationship right now is with the US and China and things like that, because I don't pay a whole lot of attention to how these other countries view the United States. But he did bring up that we are turning to not have to import things as often. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, oil production within the US is always an interesting point because I very much am on the side of the indigenous on this, of, a lot of the oil pipelines go through their land, which we are not supposed to touch. And there was the whole, Keystone pipeline debacle, which the whole reason they were protesting that was because it endangered their clean water supply. And clean water is a necessity. Like, we know this. And so they were fighting it, and the US wanted to keep it running because of greed, because capitalism, right? So shutting it down, caused the price of gas to go up, but you know what? It protected an entire population of the United States that, like, let's face it, we owe them a lot anyway, and they're treated pretty freaking ridiculously poorly. So it was a good thing. Did the price of gas going up suck? Yes. The bigger problem you have right now is that China is importing as much oil as they can get their hands on. And why would you do that? So that you can control the global supply. And that's where the whole US-China thing is coming into play, is China and a few other countries have kind of said, like, what's kept the price of the dollar, the value of the US dollar is that is the currency for oil. Globally, the US dollar is what you use to purchase oil.
Mm.
China is trying to change that. And if they change it, that could potentially tank the value of the dollar, which is kind of nerve-wracking. So we have our own pretty good stockpiled supply of oil that they're trying not to use right now, which a lot of people are like, oh, well, that's stupid. But if China is in fact stockpiling and then it's going to get way more expensive, it does make sense for us to have our own. But again, this is where America really kind of fails of figuring out how to get oil domestically without causing harm. And that's just something that we've never really put enough thought or engineering into, in my opinion.
Yeah, it seems like they never bring up that ugly side of like the other people that doing the things that we do affects. So that's not really cool. But I do like the idea of being self-sufficient essentially, and like not having to worry too much about running out of resources um, because we can't get it imported. But yeah, again, we got to think about the environment and think about the other people before just making big moves. But most of the time it seems like money is the root, and they don't think about the people.
Well, and that's the thing. The whole reason that we started outsourcing to China and Japan and all the other places was because it was significantly cheaper for them to make it than us to import it. And that's where this whole conversation of like, oh, it's American made, it needs to be American made. It's like, cool. But then you guys complain about how expensive it is. So there's no
Yeah, that's what
win-win. Yeah.
I know. That's what he brought up was like, yeah, cool, we can get everything here, but it is going to be more expensive to get it,
Yep.
even though it's right here. Like, what?
Well, and especially because, again, there's a movement within, like, I think your generation and lower of, we need to be paid a living wage. It doesn't matter what we're doing. And that's just going to drive the price up as well, because all these businesses are like, well, we can't afford our overhead and to pay more and to sell at this, whatever. We have to have a greater profit margin. So then as, workers are forcing essentially, which is great, I've got no problem with it, the minimum wage to go up, then
Mhm.
the price of goods is going to go up.
Yep. So we got to get smarter with our money, people.
Yeah, exactly.
So moving on, talking about like the trends and things like that, what do you think about the green transition?
Um, I think it's a good idea. There's always the argument of, well, we don't have the infrastructure for it. And that's just not true. I mean, Electrify America has put a lot of work into making sure that there's charging stations all throughout the US. So you can pretty much do a road trip coast to coast with an electric vehicle. It's going to take a lot more time because it takes time to charge, but you can do it. And one of the things that I think this got out of what Joseph Wang was talking about and a little more into what somebody else was talking about, but they were talking about, oh, well, we don't have the raw material needed to do this. And while, yeah, copper is kind of a high price commodity right now because it is a little bit sparse. I don't know where they got their numbers, and I think it was slightly inflated because, like you were saying, they're only telling one side of it. And that's kind of the thing is a lot of these people, everyone's a hero of their own story, but these people are like the Hercules of their story, it seemed like. So there was a lot that just was not being talked about. I think that there does have to be some sort of hard stance position made, which is what he was talking about with, I think, New York and California. And I forgot to look into it and see if what the law he was talking about actually passed. Because oftentimes when they say, laws like that pass, there's a lot of other things in that law. There's a lot of fail safes to keep a complete collapse, which is what they were talking about, from happening. So I think the green transition is a good idea. I don't think it's talked about enough that it's really, really terrible for the environment. The way they make the batteries for the EV cars, and they're not really recyclable. Although I think they are figuring out a way to recycle them now, so that might not be the case anymore. But, that's one of the greatest problems with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is the carbon footprint to mine cryptocurrency is freaking horrendous.
Oh, dang.
Yeah. And so, everyone's like, oh, well, crypto is decentralized. The banks don't have any power over it. It's like, yeah, but it's terrible for the environment. So
Right.
but again, if you're just looking at the money side of it, you don't really care. So I think the green transition is good. I think it's with anything, we see it with AI, we see it with any kind of advancements. Everyone needs to be open to the conversation. And again, because we don't really have any kind of bipartisan agreements going on right now, and the government is just so kind of like our generation of, well, I'm right, you're wrong. There's no black and white. There's no middle ground. It's we do it my way or the highway. And if we can't reach it, if you don't bend to my will, then we're done. There has to be some sort of debate. There has to be people on both sides who are going, you know what, we have to work together like we were meant to do. Actual debates need to come back. Actual conversations need to be had. And people need to break this whole I'm right, you're wrong, and I refuse to look at any other data, you know, from your side that might prove me wrong. Like, no one likes to be wrong, but you want to know that you're right. And so, not listening to any other argument and just following your gut instinct and being emotional about this kind of thing is detrimental. And I think that's what we see a lot when people say green transition. I think it's a trigger word for the older generation, even though they don't like that term, and they automatically fight it even though they don't know why, just because it's been ingrained in them that caring about the environment is bad.
It's a really good point. I never even thought about that. But yeah, our older generations definitely are ones to not like change. And I feel like we're in such a time of like big changes, big fast changes, like technologies advanced like hardcore, like since we were children. Like I remember
Yeah.
my first phone, flip phone, and now we can like wear them on our faces. Like that, and it's been such a short amount of time in between that.
Yeah.
So I just can't even imagine like where else the world will go. And I'm all for like taking care of our planet. And I was actually researching a little bit hard into this because it was pretty interesting. But just learning about like how Europe and how far ahead they are in this transition than us. And I guess that's how I've never been to Europe like you have, but that's probably how they keep it all beautiful. Like I've seen photos of Switzerland and places like that, and like the US is a beautiful country too if we take care of it and don't and do what we can to reduce that carbon footprint and
Yeah.
things. But the guy, like one of the speakers, his name was Chris Martenson. That was the other one that was talking about green energy along with this Joseph Wang guy.
That's
But
right.
he kept saying like it isn't gonna happen because it would take like 189 years to mine enough copper, or like 1,077 years to mine enough lithium and stuff. But why not just keep going and keep trying our best to not need oil. They have like that methane and like are using more natural gases, but won't that eventually run out? Like if like oil is a problem, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, none of these resources are finite. So, eventually they're all going to run out. And again, like that's why I get so entertained, I guess, when they're like, "Oh, well, people need to reproduce." And like, your generation needs to have more kids. I'm like, okay, but you realize that for each kid you have to add a half to your carbon footprint. So like for each child that you have, it's the same as driving two cars for the rest of your life or something like that. Like the carbon footprint that humans put on just for being a human is substantial. The reproducing is not
Yeah.
reproducing is bad. Like it's the same thing.
Uh Yeah, it's a whole thing. Honestly, like I don't want to sound mean right now, but I'm kind of tired of the older generation trying to tell me like what to do with my body and not do with my body. And that's what it
Yeah.
basically has felt like. But it doesn't help with the our US debt situation either when you have children, because you get a bunch of free money back in your taxes with per kid or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and
Mhm.
that's the other thing too is, that these guys talk about all the time. We need to stop giving handouts. We need to stop doing this, blah, 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 blah. And I agree. We should give hand-ups, not handouts. Um, the problem is when you already have over half the population, and this is again, this is strictly opinion, but when you have half the population who's more than happy to rely on the government, who's using government, services, of course they're not going to vote contrary to that because they need those. So, it's the same as like senators aren't going to vote for term limits and minimum or maximum ages because they don't want to be kicked out. The people that are relying on the government aren't going to vote to not rely on the government. And I love the whole, I don't believe in socialism. I don't believe it works. True socialism. I think aspects of socialism work. And that's why I laugh every time these people are like, oh, socialists are, against the country. And it's like, but you're taking Social Security, which is a socialist program. Like we already have socialist programs in place. And so this whole like buzzword, trigger word of socialism is being thrown around without them really understanding what it means, the same way that like the word communism was thrown around over the weekend. And
Oh
it's very
yeah.
clear that it was like, you really don't understand full on communism, though. You're saying it because it's going to get a reaction, and that's
Yeah.
kind of what we're seeing with all this, I believe.
Yeah, that makes sense. People need to be more receptive to other ideas, and then yeah, it just seems like they shut down at certain words, or it has to do with business and money.
Yeah.
Uh, uh,
Well, and again, you can complain about the fact that our schools don't teach anything, but if your entire business life you've been searching for ways not to pay your taxes, you don't really have a leg to stand on.
so do you want to talk about our mortgage rates?
We can. Mortgage rates have
uh
stabilized, which is good.
yeah, I noticed that. So like the 30-year fixed is about 7.16% on Friday. That was when I checked.
Nice.
The rates, I've learned that the rates on fixed mortgages don't precisely follow the Fed's moves, but when there is a correlation between between what the central bank does, how the border economy behaves, and how the mortgage market responds. Thought that was
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, correlation is not causation, obviously, but in this case, what the Fed does usually, if the Fed goes up a quarter of a percentage, interest rates tend to go up like 0.1%, I think is what we've been seeing, or a tenth of a percent. So it's interesting, but that's one of the reasons that our mortgage guys follow what the Fed does so often, and it's so funny because you have all these people who are like, every time the Fed meets, they're like, okay, well, they didn't do what we thought they were going to do this quarter. So that's a good sign for now, but it could be a bad sign for the third quarter. And then you have other people who are like, oh, well, they didn't go up. So third quarter is going to be great. It's going to go back down. And nobody really seems to know.
Mhm.
So all we really know is what we're seeing now, right? We're seeing people can still buy homes. Like we're seeing that we're still in a buyer's market because the buyers have just gotten smarter, which is good. And, you know, inflation is kind of curbed. I mean, it's probably going to continue. We are seeing petrol prices going down, which I find interesting.
Mhm.
Our economy is not a direct reflection of who's in power now. Unfortunately, it's a ripple effect. So every time, a new president is in office and their first years are like, oh, well, they did this. It's like, they didn't though. Like they spend the first couple of years trying to clean up whatever perceived mess the other guy made, and then they spend the next couple of years trying to make it better. And if you don't have a two-term president, although like there are presidents I'm very happy never got a two-term, let's just put that out there. There's not really time to see what their presidency actually did.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, it's so easy for people to just blame other people.
yeah,
Usually I keep hearing that like interest rates will probably rise like two more times, probably within the next year or two. Um, but I still believe, yeah, any time is a good time to buy a house. Like you mentioned earlier, you can always refi later, as long as you're in that good standpoint and don't just follow what everybody else says and what you read on the internet. Like you need to have your own beliefs, and buying a house is just like everything, and that can help create some financial stability
Yeah,
for
there's
a
a comment made on
person
one of my
and
YouTube videos about,
reservation.
oh, people are losing money in the Phoenix area. And I was like, well, the only people who are losing money are the ones who bought in like the fall of 2021 and expected to flip it into a great profit in like the spring of 2022. Like if you're buying your house for short term and you're trying to flip it, yeah, you might have lost money. But anybody who's actually looking to buy a home to be a home, they're going to be in it for 3 to 5 years or longer, you're going to come out ahead.
Yeah, definitely. And it just seems like people are just terrified of these interest rates, but you don't need to be scared.
Yeah.
Don't need to be scared.
Well, for a lot of people, it's just lack of education on the system as well, because again, like they think they're seeing a mirror image of 2008, which we're not. But again, if you're throwing emotional issues into it, which a lot of times is what causes these kind of issues, it takes a lot to convince someone that, no, it's not 2008, and here's why, and here's the facts, and just kind of break that barrier. So
Yep.
I
Have
think
an
as
open
people get more and more
mind.
educated, they'll be better.
Yes, education and receptive to new information.
Yes. And don't believe everything you hear.
Yeah, and we need to have our own thoughts. I'm really happy to be here with you and learning with you.
Yeah, I think we have a healthy debate on some stuff. We
Mhm.
agree on a lot of stuff, but there's some stuff that we don't quite agree on. But we don't yell and scream at each other. We just have a
I'm
conversation,
not gonna be like, no, like
right?
you can't think that way.
Oh, you think that way? We're not friends anymore.
Yeah, you better
Yeah,
think my way, or we're not
exactly.
having dinner. Yeah, no, it's good. World is crazy. No one has a crystal ball that can tell them what's going to happen tomorrow or if the market's going to crash or not crash. Nothing. Like we're all on this crazy rotating globe together, and we just figure out ways to I liked how you said to raise each other up and not or yeah,
Hand
hand
up
up.
instead of a handout.
Yeah, I like that. So hand up instead of a handout for people. And if we did collectively make decisions, or like our political parties collectively made decisions, then I think we would be in a lot better space. But we can't control this, so we can just think about ourselves and like what we can do to be better and help the people around us and do what we can.
Yep. Yeah, and this week was a really good week for the stock market too. It rebounded pretty good. So, I mean, there is positivity in what's going on right now. There is good news on the horizon. A lot of it's just, don't feed into the hype. Don't surround yourself with one side's opinion only. And, you know, if you want to invest in something, if you really want to make something happen, if you really want to buy a house, whatever it is, do your research. Talk to people, talk to experts, get a couple different viewpoints, and go from there.
No,
Because
totally.
you and I
Yeah.
can't control what the Fed are going to do. But we can pay attention. We can follow the news, and we can take that information and figure out how to make it work with our situation.
Yeah, 1000%.
Speaking of the stock market, which I just touched on a little bit, next week we are going to talk about Jeff, whose last name I never remember, from Tactical Income. And we're going to go over what he talked about, highlight his program a little bit. Because I got to be honest, he was one speaker that I was not excited about. And by the end of it, like I think he was the best speaker we saw.
Yes, he was really real. And just again, like mentorship and surrounding yourself with people that know the stuff that you like want to know. And it's just so important to not just jump into things without any knowledge or help.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was really full of information. I'm excited to talk about kind of what he talked about, what we learned about it or from him. That will be next week. Thank you guys so much for listening to Making Finances Sexy.
Stay sexy.